It's probably fair to say that ABS hasn't been a huge success since the CBD was adopted in 1992. TK holders certainly haven't seen a great deal of benefits come their way. So in my short presentation here, I'm going to consider, by way of explanation for this, some of the rather naive assumptions we believed in 1992, and I think that many people still hold, and certainly shape the ABS sort of arrangements that we are seeing around the world, perhaps more than they should. So let me talk about each of these assumptions in turn. The first is that TK is attributable to a single bounded community or country. It always comes from somewhere, right? It has an origin. And the default position held normally is that the original holders are the first or the exclusive beneficiaries. Well, that may be the case sometimes. Is it always the case? Is it most often the case? I would suggest that it's not the case as much as to be a general truth. The second is that TK is considered to remain, the same. It's kind of static in time and place. It's pure. It is unadulterated, and that's what makes it traditional. Again, is that a universal truth? Is it perhaps usually not true? Especially when we see the sort of, the life cycle of knowledge, right? Knowledge that has generally a local character in many, but not all respects, usually many respects, but then becomes something that is a raw material. Actually, I don't like to use that term raw material because it has its own value. It is finished locally often, right? Finished in the sense of it already is ready to use locally. But that it becomes something that becomes globalized, universalized, whatever. It spreads around. Okay, and the third is this idea that connecting holder beneficiaries with users is not problematic, all right? We know who the holders are. We know who the users or the prospective users are from industry. Bring them together, right? And as long as a fair and equitable deal can be made, it will be done. Contracts will be signed and everyone's happy, right? Just make the deal. So what is wrong with these three? Okay, take the first one about TK being attributable to a single bounded community as a generalized assumption. In fact, single origins are often impossible to identify. Conventional narratives are often factually wrong. Origin, in fact, may be a distraction. We often don't know, and at some point, perhaps, it ceases to become all that important. Benefit sharing shouldn't hang on so much uncertainty. Maybe we need to conceive of benefit sharing in another kind of way. It's not just about finding a group of people somewhere and just giving it the benefits to them to exclusion of everybody else. The second point about TK being assumed to be sort of fixed in time and space. It is a sort of static object. It is pure, unadulterated, and that's what makes it traditional. Well, I think it's really important to think of knowledge in a way that allows for the idea, the likelihood, particularly where it's valuable, that knowledge it spreads around, it gets mixed, right? Different communities share knowledge, it hybridizes, it gets transformed. So as knowledge goes from place to place, it goes from the very local to the global. I want to see it that way, some sort of linear progression, which is largely false as well. It changes, it mixes. It's like it's like plants and seeds. They blur around and hybridize, and it's what happens with seeds and plants. Plant life, in a way, is a sort of analogy for what happens with knowledge that is valuable. It doesn't just stay in one place and ossify. It spreads around, particularly where it is useful. So what does this imply for benefit sharing? Well, it's likely that creative additions and changes are made over time to, at some point, origin as a basis for a benefit claim will encounter a set of other equally just claims, many not origin-based. That will make things highly complicated and will certainly result in a fragmentation of any benefits. The third, this idea that connecting holder beneficiaries, I say holder beneficiaries with users, about being something that can normally be done quite easily. Well, if my criticisms of the first two assumptions are valid to the extent that they are, then the third collapses as well, right? It is problematic. It is difficult, right? Who should benefit from use in a world where knowledge travels, mixes, and changes and hybridizes is very, very difficult. This doesn't mean that benefits shouldn't be shared. It does mean it's a whole lot more complicated than we think it is. So what I've done is I've identified problems, and as an academic, I often end up saying, yes, it's complicated. No, it's not simple, it's complicated. Right? But it's important to identify these problems, these difficulties. I do hope in the webinar we will start to move towards solutions, but we do need to know what the problems are before we move towards the solution.